Greetings to everyone. Welcome to Anekdhara's 18th webinar on economic concentration and its implications in India. Before we go into the webinar proper, I'll say a few words about Anekdhara. Anekdhara, as most of you know, is set up by a minuscule group of retired civil servants as a forum to discuss important public policy issues. Though we were different in the start, we were received well. Thank you all for the support. We also received great help from academics and social activists, both as speakers and also help us in finding good speakers. While we are thankful for your support, we also request your critical feedback. You can share either as comments on the YouTube or through other social media channels like WhatsApp or Telegram. With this, we'll go on to the topic of the webinar, economic concentration and its implications in India. The topic was suggested by Professor Pranab Bardhan, and we readily agreed as it is an important characteristic of our economy. Now I'll introduce our moderator, Dr. R Badri Narayan. Dr. Badri Narayan, or Badri to most of us, is a multifaceted personality. He is a civil servant like most of us, but also he is a graduate and postgraduate in economics from Delhi School of Economics and did his PhD in economics from Penn State University. The PhD completed while he was in service. He is also an accomplished painter specializing in cartoons and caricatures. And as most of you know, career civil servants do rise up in their positions if they don't upset the apple cart of their bosses. But more important is what we do in the job is relevant. And Dr. Badri Narayan, as a divisional railway manager, as additional general manager of Central Railway, and many other postings, he combined his academic flair, artistic talent to get work done very innovatively. It could be in the design of timetabling software for Indian Railways or cleanliness campaigns on Indian Railways. His artistic talent and his academic flair was noticeable. He also did a lot of research, and in his last retirement assignment was as Chief Administrative Officer of heading the research unit of the Indian Railways. So, with reference to the traffic, the research unit dealt with the traffic patterns and the train running and all those things. So, with this, over to you, Dr. Badri Narayan, for taking forward the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for those words of introduction, especially. Makes me feel good. Good morning and good evening, and greetings to everyone in different time zones that you may be. I firstly like to thank Anekdhara for giving me this opportunity to be part of this discussion. I also want to say a word about Anekdhara. If there are people who have been tuning in for the first time, do go to the website and look at the previous series of lectures. I think they're extremely informative and valuable. On today's topic, I have a few observations before I hand over to the experts. Now, I wanted to say that when I began preparing to be part of this discussion, I did a simple search of economic concentration in India. And most of the hits were to articles which were scholarly articles which were in the 60s and 70s. So somewhere I thought maybe the keywords have changed. And I then started searching using the words inequality and other such words. And the search kind of yielded more recent work. I don't know the difference, whether one can treat economic concentration and inequality as two sides of the same coin, but something which we might learn more about as we go through the webinar today. Maybe economic concentration is referring to a greater focus on how the rich are getting richer. I don't know. But talking about the rich getting richer, I came across this study looking at the relationship between the size of the economy and the number of billionaires in the country. According to this study, it is seen that India has more billionaires than would be predicted by the GDP alone. I'd also like to mention another finding from a study by Chancel and Piketty, which examines income inequality and its evolution in India. This covers the period between 1980 to 2015, and presumably after 2015, it's only getting worse, if I may use the word. What we notice from this study is that the incomes for the bottom 90% of the population rises at a pretty uniform rate during this period. Of this 90%, incomes of the bottom 50% grew by 90%, and that of the top 40% grew by 94%. So that's if we keep out the top 10%, nothing really changes. All the action seems to be in the top 10%. And is shown in what is known as a Cobra curve. The curve rises exponentially from 90 percentile to 100. And there is a great differentiation within this top 10%. In fact, someone who's at the bottom end of the top decile has much more in common in income growth rates with somebody in the bottom 50% than with somebody in the top 1%. I thought that was an interesting piece of information which I wanted to present here just as a beginning. The other thing that, when I searched, the other thing that I found was a lot of popular articles on how economic concentration is actually good and will, can actually steer the growth of the economy. And this is the so-called Korea model that you find reference to in a lot of popular articles. And they're all talking about how the few conglomerates are the national champions who will take the whole economy forward through bringing about efficiencies of economies of scale and scope. And since we talk about WhatsApp a lot and social media, I noticed this sentiment being echoed after the Hindenburg expose on Adani, that there was a lot of people who kind of came out in support of the Adani enterprises and the individual, saying that this is, hurting a national champion, somebody who's working so hard to develop the infrastructure of the country. So you have a whole school, maybe, and I don't know how far that is, how widely prevalent, but at least the social media would lead us to believe that there are quite a few people who believe actually it's a good thing that economic concentration happens. So these are the two big things that I wanted to place here. And of course, we will have lots more to learn as we go through this webinar. And I'm now going to introduce Professor Bardhan. Professor Bardhan, as they say, needs no introduction. I mean, his volume and contribution to the body of knowledge is so immense. But it will also not be fair not to introduce him, purely because of this reason, because of his contribution. And I think we are particularly lucky today to have him spare time and talk to us on this very important topic, especially given the fact that he is one of the few economists who actually delves into political economy a lot. And that insight is very critical when we're looking at inequalities and redistribution. Professor Bardhan is the Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Economics at the Department of Economics at University of California, Berkeley. He was educated at Presidency College, Kolkata, and Cambridge University, England. He has been at the faculty of MIT, Indian Statistical Institute, and Delhi School of Economics. Unfortunately, by the time I joined, he had left, but before he joined Berkeley. He has been visiting professor, fellow at Trinity College, Cambridge, St. Catherine's College, Oxford, and London School of Economics. He held the Distinguished Fulbright Siena Chair at the University of Siena, Italy in 2008-09, and he was the BP Centennial Professor at London School of Economics for 2010 and 2011. His theoretical and field studies research span, different areas: rural institutions in poor countries, political economy, as I just mentioned, and international trade. A part of his work is in the interdisciplinary area of economics, political science, and social anthropology. He was the chief editor of the Journal of Development Economics from 1985 to 2003. He was the co-chair of the MacArthur Foundation Network on the Effects of Inequality on Income Performance for 1996 to 2007. He got the Guggenheim Fellowship in 1982. He is the author of 17 books and editor of 14 other books, and of course, more than 150 journal articles in the top economics journals like American Economic Review, Quarterly Journal of Economics, Econometrica, and so on. I would, before I, allow him to speak, I would like to mention this latest book, The World of Insecurity, Democratic Disenchantment in Rich and Poor Countries. As a result of this webinar, I got interested in this book and started reading it, and it's a fascinating read. I would recommend it to everyone. And I think for all those who are concerned about, the decline in democratic standards across the world, this is a fascinating book to read. And I could go on introducing Professor Bardhan, but I think it would be better that we take his time and listen to him. And so request Professor Bardhan to please take over. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for those very generous remarks, Dr. Badri Narayan, and also making this plug for my latest book. I actually went to India in December and again in February to promote my book. I gave a talk in the Center for Policy Research in Delhi, and also then in February I gave in the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, and also some institutions in Kolkata. So if anybody is interested, this is a book not for the specialists, but for a general readership. It's called A World of Insecurity, Democratic Disenchantment in Rich and Poor Countries. Thank you also to Anekdhara for inviting me to give this talk. Yes, I did suggest the topic of economic concentration, which is not a usual term that people use. The reason I use the term economic concentration, not inequality, because most of the literature on inequality is on household level inequality. And I'm going to start with that. But I think it is also important to study the industrial concentration or corporate concentration. So in order to cover both household and corporates, I use the term concentration because in the industry it's called industrial concentration. In household level, it's called inequality. I want to cover both. That's the reason I chose that term, concentration. Let me start with household level inequality. Unfortunately, India officially does not collect data on income distribution. In fact, Dr. Badri Narayan referred to the work by my friend Thomas Piketty. That's not official data. That is official data of a different kind. They estimate income distribution looking at the tax data, which I'm not very comfortable with, because income tax is paid by a very tiny proportion of the population, but they make some projections. But I'm going to come back to Piketty's data in a minute. So India does not collect income distribution data for a reason, because most of the economy, or at least most of the people working in the economy, are in the informal sector. In the informal sector, nobody has a clear idea what their income is. So it's very, unlike developed countries, India particularly is difficult to collect data on income. India has been collecting for many, many decades some of the best, at least developing country-wise, some of the best consumer expenditure or standard of living data, National Sample Survey data. When I started work on India, it's National Sample Survey data that I worked on, and I've also written on the quality of that data. In general, the quality used to be quite good. There are problems, but it used to be quite good. Unfortunately, for the last 11 years, we don't have any National Sample Survey official consumer expenditure data. So, for example, there's no official poverty estimates available. This is primarily because I think that our government is uncomfortable when the data are not flattering. So in fact, 2017-18 data were tabulated, estimated but then the government soon suppressed it, saying something wrong with the data. Of course, when the data don't flatter you, something must be wrong. However, I should say there is one set of data that's available. National official data, National Sample Survey. Even though consumer expenditure is not available, wealth data, assets data are available. Investment debt and investment survey is collected every 10 years, usually. And that data is available. And on the basis of the 10-year data, Piketty and his group in France use that wealth data too. So I'm going to quote from that because that data is publicly available, unlike the consumer expenditure data. So if you want to find out where the data is, the Piketty and group publishes a world inequality report. So I'm going to quote from there. It's not their data, it's projection from National Sample Survey data. But I'm going to quote from that report. So just let me quote this. In 1991, the top 1% of households in India held about 16% of total wealth in 1991. Today, they estimated from their projection on the basis of National Sample Survey data, top 1% hold 33%. From 16% in 91, it's now 33% of total wealth. That's the top 1%. The bottom half of the population, 50% of the population, in 1991 held 9% of total wealth. Today, it's 6%. So the bottom half of the population hold 6% of total wealth. Top 1% hold 1/3 of total wealth. So that tells you the degree of inequality of wealth distribution. In fact, if you ask me, we are now reaching Latin American style wealth inequality. And that brings me to the fact that all over the world, people think Latin America is most unequal region in the world. I would claim that India, even though we are supposed to be the Vishwaguru, we are one of the most unequal countries in the world. And I'll tell you why. Already I gave you the wealth inequality data. So whenever you say that we are among the most unequal, people would say, of course, you mean social equality, caste, etc. For centuries, we are socially very unequal. No, I'm talking about not social inequality, I'm talking about economic inequality. So wealth-wise, we are reaching the Latin American range of inequality. More than that, this wealth, by the way, does not include, what does it include? Wealth includes land, buildings, real estate, jewelry, livestock, and financial holdings. And of course, you can see that these things, if you ask me, the inequality data that I told you are underestimates, mainly because household survey data is very difficult to know the rich people's wealth. If you ask somebody about their financial holdings, they're not going to tell you the total financial holdings. More than that, increasingly, in many cases, if the survey investigator arrives at the door, the darwan, the gatekeeper, shoos them away. So it's very difficult to collect data from rich households now. So and few other factors, these are underestimates. The data that I quote you, underestimate. But note that this wealth does not include items of human capital, like education. How do you measure inequality of education? It is possible in a very crude way. And we now have data for various countries in the world, inequality in educational capital. It measured like inequality in the form of, say, the numbers of years of schooling of the adult population. And it has been measured now for almost all the countries in the world. And if you take that educational inequality, India is much more unequal than the whole of Latin America. Whole of Latin America. So here, worse, the inequality level in educational capital is worse than Latin America, primarily because a significant percentage of the population are either illiterate or just above. Our educational inequality is worse than Mexico's, Brazil, Argentina, and so on. Of course, inequality data, if you look at it, is a static picture at a given point. And as I gave you in 1991, then in today. We need also data on a more dynamic level. By what do I mean by dynamic inequality? Is how things are changing for the same people in terms of economic mobility or social mobility, socioeconomic mobility. This has been computed for many countries. Unfortunately, data for this are severely lacking in India. Something that I think would have been very important in India, but we don't have the data. We don't have data. There's no attempt to collect data on that. For this, because you need to collect data for the same household over time. We don't do that. There are not official surveys. There are one or two surveys for which it is possible to very crudely estimate socioeconomic mobility. And I'm going to report one such data, which has been studied by a group of authors. They look at trends in educational mobility from looking at the 1950 to 59 cohorts, people who were born in those years, and then take another birth cohort, 1986 to 89, those who were born in those years. Now, this study, what they did, so they look at the education level of these different birth cohorts, and then see for parents born in this bottom half of the education distribution in those birth cohorts, what is the expected educational rank of the child born to these parents? That's what they computed. And if the rank goes up, that suggests educational mobility. This study shows even over several decades, in spite of large increases in average income and education, the child's educational rank in the bottom half of the population remained low and largely stagnant. So all the educational improvement, income improvement, the educational mobility has not improved. In fact, for one social group, educational mobility in India has declined according to this study, and that group is Muslims. For Dalits, the scheduled caste population, educational mobility has somewhat improved, but it remains low, but it has somewhat improved. I'm very soon going to talk about the industrial concentration, but let me now mention, before I go there, since this is not just about concentration, the effects of the concentration, but I'll be very brief on it. The pattern of high inequality generates, in my judgment, a Latin American style, what I call conclave economy. What do I mean by a conclave economy? A conclave economy is an economy where a limited sector caters to an affluent elite, which demands relatively capital-intensive and skill-intensive goods. Goods which require a lot of capital or a lot of skills. For example, in service sector, software is skill-intensive. In the manufacturing sector, pharmaceuticals is skill-intensive. Or when you produce BMWs, it's both capital and skill-intensive. So an elite, the limited sector caters to an affluent elite demanding relatively capital-intensive and skill-intensive goods. Whereas much of the rest of the economy suffers from insufficient demand because of the inequality. They don't have enough purchasing power. And as a result, since there's insufficient demand for the mass goods, there's also underutilization of capacity, and thus low aggregate investment and employment. And of course, everybody knows employment is one of the severest problems, in fact, reaching an alarming level today. But even over the last 10 years, say, private investment has been relatively stagnant, relatively low, and particularly in the manufacturing sector, employment has been, proportion has been relatively stagnant. So that, in my judgment, is not the, inequality has other effects, but one effect is related to this demand pattern, underutilization of capacity, and low aggregate investment and employment in mass industries, even though elite industries are booming. One sign of it, any newspaper reader will tell you, one sign of it is that the BMW is selling very well today, but not two-wheelers. That if you compare the two-wheeler market, I'm told, is stagnant since 2012. Let me now come to the other part of concentration, the industrial concentration, particularly corporate concentration. There's not that much data. I'll cite two kinds of data. Let me cite something that I saw in the financial press. There is an asset management investment consultancy group called the Marcellus Group. They have estimated that if you take the 20 most profitable firms and trace them over the years, in 1990, the 20 most profitable firms in India generated 14% of total corporate profits. In 2010, they generated, the 20 most profitable firms generated 30% of total corporate profits. And 2019, they generated 70%. So between 2010 and 2019, the jump of the 20 most profitable firms is from 30% to 70%. I saw in business press the other day, now it's reached 90%. But let me not take it out. Maybe it's because 90% was for the year 2021. Let's say maybe it's because of COVID related. Let me just stop at 2019. 70% of corporate profits are by only 20 most profitable firms. You might also say, well, the 20 most profitable firms may not be the same firms. So why do you say it's concentrated? Maybe new firms have come up. Yes, that's probably true some time back, but in the last decade, there has not been that much churning in the composition of the most profitable firms. The other piece of evidence is some estimates have been made on the basis of, I think, Business Standard collected data. On the basis of those data, primarily of sales of corporate firms, an index of industrial concentration has been collected. and it is the index of industrial has been estimated rather, and it is generally quite high, and it is particularly high for a few sectors. I'll name them: for aluminium, for aviation, commercial and passenger vehicles, tires, copper, paints, steel, and telecom. For these industries, the business standard data suggests a very high concentration index. There are economists usually give names for this, sometimes called the Herfindahl index. That is the Herfindahl index. By the way, let me just digress for a minute and say, not merely its industry is concentrated in India, it's highly regionally concentrated as well. Let me just cite one piece of data. India has a total number of 717 districts. Of these districts, if you look at the credit disbursal by the banks data, only 10 of these districts out of 717 districts, only 10 districts in India account for 54% of the total credit disbursal. So it's not just industrially concentrated. It also tells you about how localized, in terms of locality, how much concentrated. 10 districts account for 54% of total credit disbursal of commercial banks. Recently, I saw an estimate made by Viral Acharya, who used to be the deputy governor of the Reserve Bank. He has estimated that in just 5 years, in the period 2016 to 2021, the concentration, particularly in the top 5 business groups, has increased sharply, largely through mergers and acquisitions. In fact, this is something that's very important to understand. People say, oh, these companies are making profits, maybe because they're productive, highly productive. No, we have evidence that these profits are mainly due to market power. So it's more like monopoly or oligopoly profits rather than productivity. Now, which are the top 5 business groups that Acharya has estimated for 2016-21? Concentration gone up sharply. The top 5 business groups in his data estimates are, of course, Reliance Group, Ambani, Adani Enterprises, Tata, Aditya Birla, and the 5th is, I think, Sunil Mittal, the Bharti Group. Now, these big 5 conglomerates are in over 40 sectors, 40 two-digit in national industrial classification, 2-digit level, aggregation level sectors, covering much of the non-financial corporate India. And of course, they are sheltered from foreign competition through a protective trade regime. In India, such protective trade regime is given a name, Atmanirbhar. Now here, let me take something that Dr. Badri Narayan mentioned about the social media. Sometimes say this kind of concentration is good. Look at Korea. The big difference is Korea, the big conglomerates that you think of, they're global champions. None of the Indian billionaires have a single global champion. Why? Because the Korean conglomerates operate in international competition, and they have to compete with the biggest companies. And some of these companies like Samsung, LG, etc., they have defeated international competition to rise. India shelters its billionaires. So it's not comparable between Indian conglomerates. And in fact, this is what Korea has been doing for a long time. They give them the same kind of industrial policy that PLI that is now in India is trying. One difference is in Korea, and this is not just today, for the last 30, 40 years, as soon as they help a particular conglomerate, they say you have to perform in the world market. If you don't perform in the world market, the government doesn't help you. So that test, the international competition test, Korean conglomerates have been victorious. Indian competition does not even try. In fact, one of the reasons India is afraid to join the regional trade agreements is because we are afraid we'll not be able to succeed in international competition. So our billionaires are protected billionaires. Korean conglomerates are not. They fight and in the international competition and in many cases won. So I would say India's current political economic regime is one of crony oligarchy. Favors and special regulatory dispensations tend to be reserved for the select big firms. There are many examples. Anybody who reads newspapers know this. There are many examples of rules and goalposts changed midstream, were changed midstream to help the cronies. If you want, I can give you examples. One does not need, because most people know this. Think about the Adanis taking over the airports. A company which did not hold any airport within a few months became the largest holder of airports. How were the rules changed? Civil Aviation Ministry rule was that in bidding for airports, you have to have some experience in running airports. So when Adanis came over in civil aviation, in airports, they did not have any experience. They're still allowed, violating the pre-existing rules. And then another part of the rule was that you can at a time take 2 airports. Adani started with bidding for 6 airports. That was allowed, violating a pre-existing civil aviation rule. They tried for 6 airports, relatively smaller airport, Jaipur, Lucknow, Trivandrum, etc. But of course, the big fish Adanis were after were Mumbai airport. Mumbai at that time airport, the dominant holder was GVK Group. And I don't know how many of you know, I have read this in the newspapers. Week before the bidding was to take place, there was a rumor that the finance ministry is going to revive an old investigation about GVK. So GVK realized that their time is up and they gave up. Mumbai airport was soon to be of Adani. And then Adani moved on to Navi Mumbai and so on. So this is a case in which goalposts are moved midstream. The same, by the way, for the Reliance Group. When Reliance Group very fast captured the Jio Telecom. And at the beginning, when their competitors were protesting, they are violating the telecom regulation rules. And again, I don't know how many of you know that rules were changed midstream. There are people complaining about their market power. Midstream, what is the regulatory authority name? TRAI, T-R-A-I, changed the rules, the definition of significant market power. So I could give you many such examples from other industries, but this is, again, a sign of a crony oligarchy in which rules and goalposts are changed midstream to favor a select number of firms. And recently, there was an estimate by the Economist magazine. They have been estimating for many countries. I think Dr. Badri Narayan referred to the billionaire data. It is from Forbes magazine, which collects data on wealth of billionaires. So Economist magazine took those data and wanted to find out what is the share of billionaire wealth reported in that magazine. What proportion of that wealth is derived from what the magazine, Economist magazine, calls rent-thick sectors, where most of the income is rent, not really earned, but mostly unearned, or what they call crony sectors. In other words, this rent is either because of lack of competition, because of monopoly, or because of government favors. Government regulation bodies favored you. So they call them crony sectors. And if you follow the Economist magazine, you can get what proportion of billionaire wealth in that country is derived from crony sectors. I'll just report to you what they reported for India. In 2016, the proportion of Indian billionaire wealth derived from crony sectors was 29%. 29% of the billionaires' wealth was from rent-thick or crony sectors. In just 5 years, 2021, that jumped to 43%. For now, 2021, 43% of Indian billionaires' wealth are from crony sectors. Of course, all this has another side, and that is coming to the effect of concentration. One effect, of course, is it leads to not productivity rise, but to monopoly profits and all the inefficiency that is linked to monopoly power. But I think in this case, one should also consider the impact not just on the economy, but also on the polity, because that ultimately affects the health of democracy. It is because I've already talked about the crony oligarchy, but this cronism has in effect also a quid pro quo process. It is widely inferred that these same cronies contribute big corporate money into the coffers of the ruling party. I'm saying it's widely inferred because it's secret. Nobody knows how much, but this is widely inferred. The Association of Democratic Reforms estimate that 90% of the electoral bond data, which is, of course, an ingenious con game, if you ask me. It was introduced in the name of electoral reform, which has taken out, there's no limits to electoral bond contribution and no public disclosure requirement. So it's secret, so nobody really knows. And ADR, Association of Democratic Reforms, estimate that 90% of these go to the ruling party. I should have corrected myself. When I said nobody knows, no, that's not true. These are State Bank of India bonds. So State Bank of India knows, and therefore the government knows. But we don't know. And since the government knows, there is another factor. In a climate of fear, when everybody knows if I donate money, the government knows, you don't know, but government knows. In a climate of fear, how many of the corporates, even if they wanted to, will donate to the opposition parties. So you know where the money will go. Also, since some of the same conglomerates also own media companies, they also contribute to the ruling party by carrying government propaganda full of hype and misinformation. In fact, recently, I saw a report by the Reporters Collective. I don't know how many of you know of this group of investigative journalists who called Reporters Collective. I have seen some of their study reports of investigative journalism. Let me end by just referring to one of their recent findings. So they found that not merely they own the media, these conglomerates own media companies and essentially then transmit government propaganda, they also promote the ruling party in social media. And the Reporters Collective find that one surrogate advertising company, I forget the name, I think it's called NEWJ, which had been pumping millions of rupees in promoting BJP, is actually a subsidiary of Reliance Jio. This is what the Reporters Collective investigation found out. So what I'm saying, these conglomerates not merely affect industrial concentration and therefore efficiency, monopoly power, but it also affects our polity, the health of our democracy, through either contributing disproportionately for the ruling party in the electoral bond, but also through their ownership of media companies and through their advertisements in social media. They're affecting the nature of democracy, the health of democracy in India. So let me end by saying, so I've given you some data on household level inequality, and I've given you some data on industrial level concentration. And I've also suggested to you what the effects of that for the Indian economy and the Indian polity. So let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That was neatly clarified everything. The nexus is so clear, and it's all such a nicely woven story of how the rich are being protected to stay rich, and with no benefits, as you said, because the fact that there's not going to be any competition, and they're going to be working in sectors which are essentially rent-seeking sectors. So thank you so much for that clarity that you have brought to this entire topic. Also on the difference between economic concentration and inequality. That's something I have learned. I was struggling to look for the distinction between the two, and today it's clear to me. Now I will introduce Mr. Harish Damodaran. I am, of course, an avid reader of the Indian Express and his contributions to the newspaper. Mr. Harish Damodaran is the Natural, Rural Affairs and Agriculture Editor of the Indian Express and Senior Visiting Fellow at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. A reporter and industrial editorial analyst with over 3 decades of experience, he has worked with the Press Trust of India from 1991 to 94, the Hindu Business Line from 94 to 2014, and the Indian Express from 2014 onwards. So you're also somebody who's got a different history from 2014. Damodaran is also the author of 2 books. The first book, India's New Capitalists, Caste, Business and Industry in a Modern Nation, which won the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award under the non-fiction books category in 2008. The second one, Broke to Break Through, the rise of India's largest private dairy company, won the Gaja Capital Business Book Prize for 2022. He is currently working on a 3rd book, a business biography of the founder of India's third largest industrial house at the time of independence. Damodaran has been a fellow of the New India Foundation, Bangalore, and visiting scholar at the Center for Advanced Study of India, University of Pennsylvania. And I'd like to add to this introduction that just recently, a week ago, I happened to read the interview of Dr. Arvind Panagria. And the last question in that Express Adda Ideas Exchange was from you on inequality. And I noticed that Dr. Panagria gave a very different view on the rising inequality as you asked in your question. So over to you, Mr. Damodaran, to tell us more about it.
Thank you, Dr. Badri Narayan. Well, I think it's an honor to be here, especially to speak alongside Professor Bardhan. I mean, I'm a pygmy in front of him, and he has covered such a wide canvas, So I have nothing much really to add, to what he said. But I think that there are two things, every economist, policy maker, civil servant, or even politician should be concerned about. Number one is poverty and inequality. The second is inequality. So there is a school of thought that believes that, countries, especially when they are in their early stages of development like India, we can afford to tolerate rising inequality so long as absolute poverty levels are falling, and real incomes are rising at the bottom deciles, So as long as poverty is declining and real incomes at the bottom are going up, whatever gradually, whatever, it's fine. I mean, so inequality is kosher. And as Dr. Badri Narayan said, Dr. Arvind Panigrahiya, whom my newspaper had a recent idea, it seems to confer precisely with this particular view that it's fine to have, inequality is kosher as long as, but of course, poverty should come down, that's very important. Now let's forget economic concentration, inequality, etc. Let's look at even, even poverty falling, I'm not sure whether even that is happening, the reason is simply because we don't have data. I think Professor Bardhan talked about income distribution, whether we are measuring socioeconomic mobility, through longitudinal data. You forget about those. But we had something called the census. We had something called the Household Consumer Expenditure Survey. Okay, the first one was decennial, and the second one was quinquennial. Every 5 years. And I think we used to conduct this. We never missed any census, right? Since 1881. And I think in the case of Household Consumer Expenditure Survey from 1972-73, every 5 years. Now, I don't know when the next one is going to happen. I don't know. Quinquennial, then you have whatever, decennial. Now, probably, I don't know, every 15 years is, I think, what do you call it? I think they call it something like quindecennial or something, right? I think that is a term they use. So we don't have data today, frankly, to know whether poverty is reducing. You forget about inequality. Inequality is rising. I think we take it for granted. But I am concerned even about poverty. And for me, there are some very, very, very basic indicators which I go by, which I don't know, may not strike many people. Number one, I look at something like, say, milk consumption. Okay, milk is a classic superior good. Okay, in India, when incomes rise, milk consumption goes up. Okay, and because that is the first thing that Indians consume. Immediately you replace, like earlier you would have been putting, say, dalda, vanaspati ghee, or vanaspati on your fulkas. Moment income increases, the poor family replaces dalda with desi ghee. Okay, so I would look at something like milk consumption to be a major indicator, and I think the past studies have shown that for every 1% rise in household incomes, it generates something like, I think, 1.6% additional consumption demand for milk and milk products in India, and I think that income elasticity of demand is supposed to be even more. I think 2 to 2.3 for low income and very poor households. Okay. Now, from the data which I have based on, sales of liquid milk by cooperatives, and also I've been looking at the dairy companies, top 12, 13 dairy companies. When I look at the sales data, what I'm seeing is that your milk consumption is growing only at about 3 to 3.5%. So if milk consumption is growing at only 3 to 3.5%, and at the same time, we are assuming that the income elasticity of demand is something like it's something like 1.6 in the case of milk. Then that is it's very clear that our real incomes are growing maybe by about 1 to 1.5%. Not more than that. And I'm sure this will apply even to chicken, fruits and vegetables, any protein or micronutrient rich foods. So that is my first indicator which I will look at. At milk consumption, whether it is growing. If it's not growing, it's very clear that there is a problem with incomes. With real incomes, they are not rising. Okay. The second indicator is, of course, I think again, Professor Bardhan talked about it. Two-wheeler sales. I think. It was something like 20 to 21 million per year in 2017-18, and I think last 2 years it has fallen to 15 to 16 million, whereas we know that car sales are increasing, especially high-end cars, BMW and all these things. So if two-wheeler sales aren't growing, if milk consumption isn't growing much, that means there is definitely a problem with real incomes also. Okay, and the third indicator, of course, is rural wages. I think Jean Drèze has recently he has estimated the real rural wages growth. I think between 2014-15 at like 1% per year. So that confirms to my understanding of why it tallies with my estimate of milk consumption growing by only 3 to 3.5%. Yeah. So if rural wages are growing by only 1% per year, I think Dr. John Drèze has estimated at some 0.9% for agricultural laborers, 0.2 for construction workers, and I think 0.3% for non-agricultural workers. So that's a very clear indication of even real incomes not rising. Fourth indicator, I think, is basically there is a stalled, if not a reverse kind of a structural transformation. So structural transformation, I think everyone knows, it basically refers to the movement of the labor force from agriculture to manufacturing and modern services. Where these are sectors where productivity is supposed to be higher, output per worker, and wages are also higher. So if you look at long-term data, I think between 93, 94 and 2011, 12, those I think the first 2 decades after liberalization, I think the share of agriculture to the total workforce came down from about, I think, 65% to some 49%. Okay. But I think the latest data, I think the latest PLFS data, the periodic labor force data shows in 2021-22, I think only 46%, So from 65 to 49 and 49 to 46, that's a very slow rate of decline, So which means people are not moving out of agriculture, rather they are staying in agriculture. In fact, there's one data which I would have, frankly, I have not studied, but my feeling is, maybe since there are many people who are in the railways, my feeling is that the total railway passengers have fallen. Okay. I think the total passenger traffic has fallen, and that is an indicator of migration, because when I go in metros, etc., it's absolutely khali, I don't find much rush kind of a thing. So what is happening? See, so when you look at migration, when you speak to, so it's not that people are migrating because wages are higher. Okay, people are migrating in the hope that there's a better future once I migrate. So actually people like, say, for example, I may come from, say, Sivan or Vaishali or something. So about 2 years, I really struggle in Delhi, and definitely I'll be earning probably less than what I was earning back home. Okay? But there is still the promise that, I will, my future is better when I'm in the cities, So the movement doesn't take place because of current wages. It's not the current wage differential between transplanting paddy or picking cotton, versus how much I'll earn by pulling a rickshaw in Delhi or Bangalore or something. But it is basically people look at the future. Same is the case with people who go from India to, say, Dubai or something. It's not that they are earning much, but basically there is something called, like over a longer period of time, I hope that my incomes are higher. My feeling is that one thing which this lockdown has done is I think it has destroyed that hope, and which is why I'm saying I think maybe railway data on passengers, I hope somebody helps me with this thing. I'm sure you people will have a bit of whether that traffic has come down. My hunch is it has come down because and that, according to me, it means that there is no hope. I think that is something, the trust has been killed. That is, when I go to the city, nobody is going to displace me. I'll be tolerated. But so I think the impact of those migrations post lockdown, I think it would have created a permanent kind of an insecurity kind of a thing. And plus, what has happened is last 3 years we have also had good monsoons. Okay, last 4 years. So maybe that is also another factor. People are saying, hey, come on, man, I'll be in my village, I'll do some agriculture. And anyway, government is now giving me free grain. So why come to the cities, etc. So probably the next migration, it will be more a distress migration. It'll be maybe like this year, it's possible that we may have a drought here. So it could be induced by, it could be a sort of a push, rather than pull. Earlier the migrations were a result of pull rather than push. Okay, and the hope that my future is not good, but I can do something for my children and their future, so I can secure a future for them. So it's always the hope, which I think is the trigger, is the main motivation for migration in a positive way. Where unlike distress, there's no rains, there's no water. I can't even feed my cattle, so therefore I kind of get out. It's not that. So I think this is the aspect which we need to look for. Okay. Now coming to inequality. So I think even in poverty, my feeling is things aren't as great as people are making it out. But ultimately, we have to depend on data. And when there is no data, then what do you do? Then you have to look at all kinds of anecdotal things, what people are saying, and those kind of things. Or you have to look at some alternative data sources. So for me, milk sales is one indicator. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I think railway traffic could be another indicator, if at all it confirms to what I'm saying. Okay. Now, as far as inequality is concerned, there have been basically 3 big shocks that the economy has experienced in the last 10 years. The first is, of course, demonetization. The second is GST, and the third was lockdown. And actually, what has happened is, I think Professor Bardhan has talked about household inequality as well as I think at the firm level inequality. Because most of our businesses are basically household based, right? Basically these are unincorporated businesses, right? And these are informal, and these are largely household based. Maybe one, maybe family members, etc. Now, if you look at it, how were these businesses traditionally operating? These businesses were traditionally operating basically without leaving any paper trail, and doing mostly in business in cash. There was some kind of an anonymity, where you could do where you could do business freely without the taxpayer coming behind you and those kind of things, right? Basically cash and non-tax paying sectors, you can say, or very low tax kind of a thing. Now, what has GST done? GST basically now has created a trail, where it is impossible to avoid taxes, right? So like for example, you look at, for example, how it was in, say, Surat or say Ital Karanji earlier. Let us look at a sector like, say, textiles. Okay, in a textile thing, typically say if I'm a power loom, if I'm a power loom operator, right? I make basically, say, fabric, right? Cloth. So basically, I buy. I normally say I would buy say yarn, right? Say textile yarn, say polyester fiber yarn or something. I buy that, right? And then I process it into some kind of fabric. It could be a gray fabric. Maybe there'll be some kind of dyeing. Okay, and then I supply it to a sari maker or a dress material maker, right? And And so all these things, the three things happen. So earlier what was happening was that it was only the yarn of fiber which was being taxed. Okay, whereas there was no tax at all on the fabric. There was no tax on the sari, etc. I mean, it was there, but since the entire business was being done in cash, nobody paid actually taxes, kind of a thing. But today it is impossible. You cannot. So I think what has happened is your entire informal sector has kind of, I won't say it has collapsed, but definitely you see more and more of the market share being taken by large entities. So which is why you see, after demonetization, etc., what happened? I mean, in the normal case, as an economist, you would have thought, hey, man, demand is gone. This will kill incomes, etc. But your Sensex kept rising, right? I mean, the markets went up. Why? Because what was the calculation? The calculation was that, whatever the informal sector, it has a market share. That market share will now be basically, it will be now taken over by the formal sector. And actually that happened, And for me, one of the defining features of the lockdown, which we had, actually, if you see during the period from April 22nd to 15 July 2000, during these less than 3 months period, at the height of the pandemic, Reliance Industries, it raised something like 205,000 crore, including selling, I think, about 33% in Geo platforms, which is basically the platform for all, for all its Geo, for digital, everything, They raised something like 205,000 crore, and this was precisely at a time when we had migrants going back to Bihar, going back to their villages, etc. And this was the best moment for Reliance, actually, raising so much of money, so effortlessly. So on the other hand, you had enterprises, collapsing, literally like flies and mosquitoes. Probably you had firms dying every day, kind of a thing. But here was somebody who was able to raise so much of money, through a rights issue and sale of equity to big international investors, right? So if you look, and same was the case with the Adanis, etc. Right? I mean, what Professor Bardhan referred to, airports, etc. These all happened precisely during the post-pandemic kind of a period, which happened. So what you are seeing is definitely, yes, number one, the market share of formal listed companies has gone up, across all industries, whether it is paints, whether it is two-wheelers, whether it is toothpaste, anything, probably maybe one or two players maybe having today 50% kind of more than 50% market share in all these businesses. But also what we are seeing is we are seeing a return of the old conglomerate capitalism. See, basically what happened in the first 2 decades of liberalization is you had more and more companies who were specialized, who came up by becoming champions in specific industries. Like, for example, you had, say, Infosys in IT. Right, you had Sunil Mittal, say, in telecom, etc. Right, but now we are actually seeing the old model of horizontally diversified. The conglomerates coming back. That model is coming back now. What we are seeing is one industrial group straddling multiple industries, and becoming leaders in that. Like, for example, you look at Reliance. Reliance today is a dominant player, not just in petrochemicals, but also in telecom and in retail, right? So 3 industries he is controlling. Tatas are, of course, there in steel, in commercial vehicles, salt, IT services, right? If you look at Aditya Birla, he's number 1 today in cement. He's number 1 in aluminium, Hindalco, and also in chloralkali, in caustic soda, hydrochloric acid, etc. Right? And of course, Adani's, we know, ports, power, edible oils, branded edible oils, and of course now we also have airports. So I think this is what is happening today, in overall. So number 1, inequality definitely has risen. On that there is no there's no doubt about that. The second one is of course, I think there's going to be an issue of poverty, And definitely, as Professor Bardhan has indicated, this will have long-term implications in the kind of industries that are going to come. Probably there's not much of a future in industries like, say, textiles, dairy, food products, and etc. Whereas India will definitely be a huge market for, BMWs. Even if you sell 100,000 BMWs a year, that's huge. That's huge money, which any company would be having. So I think we are going to see that kind of a thing. I think the term, I think not enclave, not enclave economy. I think he called it a conclave economy. Yeah. So definitely, I think we are moving something to that. And definitely, this is going to pull down India's long-term growth. There's no doubt about it. I think inequality itself may shave off maybe, I don't know, 2 to 3 percentage points. So suppose our potential is 8%, it could be now 5%. So this could be the new Hindu rate of growth. So this new Hindu rate of growth is not bad. 5% is not bad if there are fewer players to partake of the cake. And definitely those companies, those entities will have very high market valuations. And I think this is broadly the picture which is coming to. And yes, there will also be implications for politics, right? Earlier, if you see, you had regional parties, right? I mean, they were being funded by whom? By sugar millers, by tent wallahs, by small traders, by PWD contractors, small guys. The small guys, they would fund some politician. That politician would become minister, and then the small guy then would start getting bigger contracts. This is how actually the Indian our democracy and capitalism evolved. That is the model, and which is why we never had that kind of a crony capitalism in the conventional term, because the cronies keep changing. So each government will bring in new cronies. And as long as the ranks of the cronies keep changing, there's a constant shuffling of new players. Whereas now we are probably moving to a situation where you will have the same guys going into more and more industries, and because of and leveraging their market capitalization, to borrow more, So we will become like maybe we'll have maybe like South Korea. But as Professor Bardhan said, without selling, without exports, right? Whereas we should remember that most of our exports are still coming from the small guys, right? I mean, textiles, leather, maybe like if you go to a Tirupur, I think they export something like I think about $8 to $9 billion, and probably nobody there is more than say 2,000 crore, right? I mean, so it is mostly mid cap players, who are the players, but probably now, the ranks of the mid-cap guys will come down. MSMEs, definitely, it will be very difficult for them to sustain. So you will have more and more of these large players who would become bigger. And it is very easy and very, these whatever large players, say 10, 15 of them, it's easy to run a party. It's easy to collect money from these 10 people, through electoral bonds, etc. Whereas, so you don't need the tent wala, you don't need the sugar miller, the liquor, the abkari, who are the typical whatever, which was our typical model of whatever so-called electoral funding. It is all cash-based. Whereas today, now we are coming to a very clean, tax compliant, GST compliant. Everything is, everything is legal. Everything is this thing. And I think one point which Professor Bardhan forgot to mention is, the contributions to the subscriptions to the electoral bonds are also, you also get tax exemption on those contributions. So that is a kind of a sort of icing on the cake. Apart from, you're anonymous, you can fund unlimited, but you also get this thing. So if I can, I think in the next elections, BJP would easily have a fund base of maybe about, I think, 2 lakh crore. They'll have 2 lakh crore, and maybe this can be collected from 20 people. So 20 people, 10,000 crore each. It's very easy. Whereas the opposition, you will find more and more tax raids on like someone who's making perfumes, right? People who are running small businesses running on cash, and they'll be shown as villains. Gathe bhar ke notes hain, So they'll be shown as villains. So it will be very difficult for all these like the Kannauj, that perfume makers and all these guys to survive. So I think it will be very difficult for any opposition to take on the ruling party today, because everything has been centralized. You have political centralization, you have corporate centralization. So both together are working. Whereas probably, I don't know, maybe this is more like a Putin's Russian economy kind of a thing. So we may have a democracy, everything, but obviously it's not going to be sustainable. And I don't know whether there will be a pushback to this, because that will be the thing which will be interesting, how the pushback happens, whether it will happen at all, that kind of thing. Thanks. I think I don't think I have more to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Damodaran. And also for giving us real-life examples of the conclave economy, with your wide experience in the field. And you ended on a note about how this will break. I mean, it seems to me like, we had a vicious cycle of poverty and the virtuous cycle, and now this is a vicious for some and virtuous for some cycle of cronyism. And there doesn't seem to be any way to break this cycle. And most of the questions that I'm seeing on the chat box are, questions about worrying about how will this cycle be broken, if at all, And so I'm going to read out some of the questions which reflect this angst about what will happen in the future. So the first question I have is, as the economic concentration is worsening, this is not the first question, but I would ask this one first. Will it force freebies to mushroom that again helps the party in power to strengthen the status quo in the name of national pride? So, and then there's I just want to, and the larger question to Professor Bardhan is, what is the solution to reduce concentration? And I want to also include one other question along with this, which is, will not the economic concentration nullify the much touted democratic dividend by adversely affecting HDI, increasing child wastage, malnutrition mothers, asymmetrical development of various social groups? So I'd like to put these three questions together and maybe request Professor Bardhan to first respond.
Could you repeat the first one? I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, I'll just get it. So as economic concentration increases, will it force freebies to mushroom and further consolidate the party in power in the name of national pride? So that was the first one.
Okay, let me respond to each of them. I actually also had one or two things that came to my mind while listening to Mr. Damodaran, actually to supplement that he said. So I hope I'll get an opportunity later. But let me take these questions first. About the freebies, I think we have a situation. Freebies, I think our Prime Minister has called them what? The reveries are. Something is a reverie when it's suggested by the opposition. When the government gives another freebie, that's not a reverie, right? Government gives quite a few reveries, if you ask me. Government, of course, gives a lot of reveries to the conglomerates, but also for poor people. So I have a feeling that I don't exactly know what the person who asked the question, what he or she had in mind. In a way, this legitimization of the crony conglomerate capitalism has been still electorally acceptable, made electorally acceptable to large numbers, certainly in North India. It didn't work that much in Karnataka election, that you provide some welfare measures for the very poor. You may call them freebie, you may call them reverie, but you may not, because some of these, if helping the poor is not always because it helps not just them. For example, if you give some money, either in the form of cash or in the form of a direct benefits scheme, or in the form of actual free grains or whatever, if as a result the poor family has more money to spend on other good things like health, education, etc., it's good for the economy. So to me, it's not a freebie. Helping the poor is not a freebie. If the poor uses that money to drink up or drugs, that's a different thing. But if the woman whom you are helping, she therefore has more money to spend on milk, as Mr. Damodaran was pointing out, or health or education, to me, that's not a reverie. That's what is helping the economy. That's something I think one difference that one is to keep in mind, that helping the poor is also helping the economy. I've already pointed out is because the poor are not being helped, that there is a demand problem in the mass consumption goods industries. But yes, in answer to the question, as inequality rises, concentration rises, at election time, the ruling party will of course use some of these freebies, whichever the ruling party is, including the current ruling party, will use freebies to get support of voters. And when freebies are not enough, then you sell Hindutva, you sell nationalism, to make our country great India wants to be great power. So that kind of rhetoric comes in, Hindutva rhetoric comes in when the economic measures are not enough. Karnataka showed that it's not enough. Giving the rhetoric is not enough. But I expect these freebies to be a very important part of election winning, whichever the ruling party. All ruling parties do that. But this particular one calls them reveries when it's given by other parties. The second question about, which is a bigger question, solution, how to reduce concentration. There are obvious ways of reducing concentration. If you're thinking of industrial concentration, there are all kinds of anti-monopoly measures you can take. Or if you want to household level inequality, tax the rich. Indian rich is undertaxed. India, even compared to United States, where the capitalist lobby is very strong, the capital gains tax in India is lower than in the United States. United States has, in spite of all the dilution, has an inheritance tax. So when the rich gives to their children, there is a tax, the very rich. In the United States, inheritance tax in India is zero. So the rich passing on to their children, it's zero tax. Agriculture, if you are a rich farmer, zero tax. Wealth taxation has been taken away. So there is a lot of things you can do to reduce household level inequality, taxing the rich. But having said that, I think that is not the level where the discussion should be, because I can give you hundreds of things that the government could do. But if the nature of government is essentially a crony oligarchy government, you don't expect the government to do this. You don't expect the government to tax the rich in a big way. In fact, if you think of even the lockdown time, these migrant workers, there was no help to them. They could get help only when they go back to the village and do rural employment, Enriga. but there's no help at the urban end. And the government's fear is that if you help, there might be stealing, there might be theft, there might be fraud, corruption. So all these migrant laborers had to walk all the way to their home to get any help. As Mr. Damodaran has pointed out, the people who got hurt, producers who got hurt, are in the MSME sector, the small and the micro. Many of them died because there was no help. So I think it's useless to say they should be helped. Of course, they should be helped, but you don't expect governments who are primarily concerned with helping the conglomerates, and only at election time does give some reveries to the poor. You don't expect them to tax the rich, and you don't expect them solutions to reduce concentration are available. Any economist will tell you what to do, reduce concentration. To me, the important question, will the government do it? Is there the political will plus the political capacity to do that? That is much more important today. The political question is much more important. Otherwise, solutions, we can give many solutions theoretically, but will those be carried out? The third question about the demographic dividend. Demographic dividend is about something else. Demographic dividend is because we are now going through a situation in which we have large numbers of young people. In other countries, including rich countries, and now in China, people are getting much older. The average age, the median age is much higher. India still is in that opportunity. If our young people, we could utilize them properly, then that would have led to growth. But unfortunately, we are not being able to give jobs to the young people. So the demographic dividend is not merely not there, by and large, it may be a curse, because these people, young people, who do not have jobs, quite often become the foot soldiers of these people who lynch other people, who vandalize other things. So there may be this high unemployment and underemployment may actually cause a lot of social and political problems. All over India, you will hear lots of stories of essentially young people joining groups of thugs, essentially, and political thugs, including all parties, not just the ruling party. So demographic dividend is not merely there, it's a very large chance of it's becoming a demographic curse. But there are things that one can do, but it's easier said than done. Of course, when there's no jobs, if you want to turn it to a demographic dividend, you might say, give them jobs. That's not easy. I have written on this many times. There are some immediate policies one can take, even in the case of jobs. I think much depends on the skill level. Our government took policy, but largely it has failed. Very few people have been skilled. I think the German system is like majority of school-leaving people are pushed into the vocational programs, and vocational programs which are helped by the business groups, because that way they get skilled workers, apprentices, and so on. Our vocational program of skilling and vocational programs have not been successful. And until then, you will not be able to give jobs to these people. Quite often, these people are not just unemployed, they are quite often not employable. They are unemployable because at their skill level, this is true, by the way, at all skill level. I remember once talking to Mr. Narayan Murthy in Infosys. Even at the high engineering level, he said he had to establish a university Infosys University in Mysore. Because the engineers who are coming to them, they may be, IQ may be high, but they're not employable because they don't have the requisite skill. Now that's at the high engineer level. Think about the low skill level. Quite often, increasingly, we need skilled and training that we don't have. And so one can think about solutions. The question is the government serious in doing them?
Yeah, I think I'll start off with the demographic dividend part. See, I looked at a simple exercise I did. You take the top 5 IT companies in India. Okay, you look at. I just took the top 5 IT companies, which is basically your Infosys, TCS, Wipro, right, and Tech Mahindra and HCL. You know, if you look at just these 5 companies, okay, in the pre-pandemic, I think basically 2019-20 fiscal year ending, you know, pre-pandemic, I think the top 5 employed about 11.5 lakh workers, okay, IT workers, okay. Now, today, they are employing about 16 lakh workers, okay. So you look at it, you know, from 11.5 to 16 lakh workers, just these 5 companies, okay. I think Indian Railways is about 12.5 lakh people, right? And I think your entire defense services is all the 3, that is Army, Air Force, etc., is about, I think, something like 14 lakh. Okay, so 14 lakh your defense forces, 12.5 lakh is your railways, and IT. Just these 5 companies are today engaging 16 lakh people. Okay. But these 16 lakh people, these are basically what? Programmers, software engineers. Now, everybody cannot be a software engineer or an IT programmer, right? And I looked at, I think, the average, I think, income per employee in these 5 came to around something like 35 lakh rupees, okay, which is a lot of money. I mean, if you look at it. So today, what you have is you have jobs which are being generated by, you know, high-skilled work, you know, like I think again Professor Bardhan pointed out in the beginning itself, you know. But what we need basically jobs to be created for children who are coming out of class 10, right? Girls and boys who are passing out of class 10, right? And those jobs can ultimately be only in manufacturing or in, you know, modern services, but not necessarily IT. You know, so I think the real problem is going to come in that, you know, because we are precisely at that period of that demographic transition, you know, where I think next 10 years, you know, we'll have a bulging youth, we'll have a youth bulge, you know, and when that youth doesn't get jobs, what would be the political backlash? I don't know. What kind of political pushback it would have, you know? I mean, it is possible that these 10 years which we are seeing may be just a small speck, maybe an aberration in history. I mean, from an optimistic point of view, I would say it could just be a temporary phase. But I'm very clear that this youth bulge, if it is not able to find employment, it is going to be a serious problem. Okay, I believe that if you look at it from a political economy point of view, I think Mr. Modi has created a new social contract. Okay, it is between big conglomerates. Okay, big conglomerates who pay taxes, right? And he tells them, look, you give me tax, and you pay me taxes and all these things. You give me money, and he then gives the money to the absolute poor, right? I mean, through whatever gas cylinder and you know, free food and all these things. And today with GST, etc., when you look at the revenues, the revenue base has grown so much, you know. So it is, I mean, it is quite possible that the Modi model is sustainable. You know, you basically take care of the very rich or the very poor, and the very poor are coming from, you know, nothing. I mean, for the first time they are having gas cylinders. For the first time, you know, this kind of a thing. So I think that is the kind of the politics-wise he has created this alliance of the very rich and the very poor. You know, note upar se, vote niche se. That I think that is the model. But there is a very large middle, which could be traders, which could be MSMEs, which could be unemployed youth, this kind of a thing. So how the middle will react to this? That is what I think will be very interesting. But right now, I mean, it looks like through a mix of Retd getting money from this thing, and along with it, as Professor Bardhan said, nationalism, whatever, Hindutva. But we know that Bajrangbali failed. Bajrang Bali and Tipu Sultan failed this time in Karnataka. But it doesn't mean that it won't succeed in UP or in Madhya Pradesh and this kind of a thing. So I think definitely, aspirations is going to be a problem, and Modi definitely has unleashed aspirations. And today, especially with smartphones, etc., people know what is happening in the world. So definitely there will be a pushback. How it will take, in what form will it happen? When you see wrestlers today on the streets, etc., I don't think it's going to be such a smooth ride either. But for now, it looks like this formula is a very sound formula. You have fewer players. I give you profits. I give you a large share of this thing, and some of that you pass it on to me. Today, more businesses are paying tax than before. Okay, whereas we know that in earlier, most businesses weren't paying taxes, right? And that is what was probably keeping the economy also alive. We had a very large. It's not a black economy, but basically an unaccounted economy, and a lot of money was floating in. And as long as it was floating in within the country, there was nothing wrong. You could see, it was creating a lot of demand. But today we don't have those kind of things. Like for example, when a lockdown happened, there was absolutely there was no fallback, right? I mean, whereas earlier India had a lot of these shock absorbers. Whether it was MSMEs and all these things. So today, the shock absorbers are entirely now, it is entirely dependent on the state handouts, right? Free grain and these kind of things. And what has happened is now with this DBT, because now you have this, you have this, I think what Arvind Subramanian called it as the jam trinity. Today you can identify each person, through Aadhaar. Everyone has a bank account, so it's very easy for you to transfer money, and it's not just Modi who has seen the potential of DBTs. You look at Andhra, look at Telangana. Many states have now, taken to DBT in a very big way, so you can transfer money straight, So there's nothing called state capacity today. Governments don't have to build schools, they don't have to build hospitals, they don't have to build universities. They can just transfer money, So it has become very easy kind of a thing. So today, state capacity is about just basically, raising revenues, distributing, and maybe during the time of election. So whereas earlier state capacity was about, doing all these kind of things, which are more difficult. Whereas today now, the poor see money in their accounts, right? And when they see money in their accounts, say 2 months before election, that obviously creates a certain, it creates a certain favorable opinion. So I think that is by and large my response.
Before I take on a few more questions, I think Mahesh has a question. Mahesh, would you like to come?
So I'd like to pose it to both of you from different angles. One was that, before 1980, when Mrs. Gandhi hosted, or rather Dhirubhai Ambani hosted a dinner, which she was present at for over 2 hours, the political leadership was hesitant to be seen so publicly with a very senior member of captain of industry. And Mr. Ambani of 1980 was a rising force. It's not like the force the Ambanis are today. Similarly, before 91, when J.R.D. Tata was given Bharat Ratna by Narasimha Rao government, no top industrialist, I don't count Vishwesvaraya as an industrialist. Vishwesvaraya was a visionary engineer who helped to build industry, was given one. So has the captains of industry, are they above the criticism of the political class? The last leader who took on a large industrial house sustainably was VP Singh vis-a-vis Ambani's. And probably we can find other examples, CPI and Birlas, they brought out excellent publication in 60s. That's one. Second question actually is slightly different. I was just wondering, last 75 years, many of the new industries or industrial groups, not in this top lot, not Ambani, Adani, they came from peninsular India. One thinks of Reddys, Gounders, Nadars, others, Iravas, some of the groups in Maharashtra. Has that process slowed down? Because one is to break up concentration of the big players. Other is there may be a flowering of medium and small capital. And that seems to have taken big hit in this era of, the bank cleanup loans. I am really struck that bank cleanup loan is affecting, say, GMR, GDK. It doesn't seem to be affecting these big players. They've taken huge loans. In fact, some of their projects are not sustainable environmentally, but there are others we are not even sure economically. So two questions. One is the political class as a whole, and I'm not referring to a particular party. Both instances I gave are Congress, can give several instances of other parties. Have they changed? And has India stopped encouraging growth of medium, small capital, which for all its negatives did open, they went into a lot of these sectors Mr. Damodaran was referring to, which are relatively more employment rich. Thanks.
So before you answer these questions, let me just add to that some of the questions that have been asked by the other listeners, which are somewhat similar. The question is whether this crony capitalism is more a distinct feature of this regime, or has it been there for a longer time? And there's another question which you'll have to lean on your sociological research, whether this is inevitable given the caste inequalities and the concentration of all kinds of power with certain groups. So is this just a continuation of a long historical trend, or is it just a continuation of a crony capitalist regime which has been there for long? And also, I think some of these things you have addressed already, but will it break in any way? And if so, how will it break?
Let me start with the end. Crony capitalism has been in India for quite some time. The relation between government and capitalists have been close. The Congress party used to raise money in Mumbai, same way. But I think what has happened, the change now, by the way, I don't think it's just the caste inequality issue. Going to the other question about crony capitalism is there all over the world, including in the United States, but probably the most virulent form is in Russia. It has nothing to do with caste inequality. It is a particular form of relationship between government. Essentially, you make money from industries which depend on government favors. This is what the Russian model, and today we are unfortunately going in that direction. So government favors to industry has been for a long time, but now it's much more streamlined to a much smaller group than before. And I think Mr. Damodaran pointed out that it's now become that kind of a model in which you just take money from a very small number of people and then give part of it to the very poor. And then that's the political model that you have in mind. I think the other question that came up about regional capital is important. I think there was a phase some decades back, I would say in the 2 decades, 1990s and the first decade of this century. If you take 1990 to 2010, this is the period you may remember when the regional parties were important and the Delhi governments were often coalition governments. So Delhi coalition governments depended on the regional parties, and the regional parties depended on regional capital. So you mentioned the Reddys and others, the regional capital. That is gone now. First of all, the regional capital, I think, could not compete with the conglomerates. This is also related to the changing production relations. I think all over the world, and including in India, economies of scale of various kinds are very important. And these economies of scale are data-driven. The larger, so there is a kind of a vicious cycle. The larger the numbers you cater to that generate data, and that gives you an advantage in the next stage. So the middle and the small cannot compete with the economies of scale, data-driven often, that they enjoyed by the conglomerates. So I think the regional capital could not raise money as much as the conglomerate capital. And the way the raising money comes in, so Adani's, for example, and even Ambani, they raise money often in the foreign markets. The foreign portfolio investment is coming, and the foreign portfolio investment, they are sure that Adani's and Ambani's will not fail because they will be backed. Even if they fail, as Adani case showed, government will back them. So I call it a different form of sovereign guarantee. It's a kind of, these conglomerates have sovereign guarantee. And that's what you need when you lend money. So they can borrow money. And that is very important for them in terms of, this advantage the regional capital do not have. Regional capital, I mean, the GVKs and the Reddys, etc., may raise capital in Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. But national capital or foreign capital, they don't have that much access. So I think regional capital now is at a disadvantage, and particularly under the present government, when they are essentially concentrating on a few national conglomerates, rather than on regional capital. I think Mr. Damodaran has already referred to that. On the first question of Mr. Rangarajan, I think, yes, I think over time, I mean, there are always some relation between domestic capitalists and the government, but I think it has become much more integrated now, much more intense. And there you can afford to do that because the number is very small. Otherwise, giving the example Mr. Damodaran gave, you have to have good relation with the liquor baron there, sugar baron there, and so on. Now you don't have to worry that. All you have to do, keep relation with 4 or 5 big groups. And that's so the atat between capital and the politicians, the national politicians, have become much more intense because it's now doable. Earlier, the system was much more loose and much more anarchic. And it was difficult to control always. Now it's much more controlled. So I think that is the major difference, I would say, in answer to Mr. Rangarajan's first question. I think I have answered all the 4 questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first thing is, I think in India, generally, politicians never like to be seen alongside industrialists. Okay, and there was generally a suspicion of people who made money. Okay, probably Gujarat is one state where if you make money, you are not looked down upon. You know, people respect people who make money. You know, the ordinary person has a respect for the person who makes money. You know, so it's very much like it's very much like in the US, say, for example, right? I mean, if someone becomes rich, you know, people say, "Hey, man, he deserves it. He worked hard. He deserves it." So probably the Protestant ethics and maybe the Vaishnava Hinduism, you know, there is something common between the two. That is, you became rich because of values of thrift. You sacrificed things. So the businessman is always looked upon as a guy who deserved to make the money. So it was not surprising that somebody like, say, Donald Trump could contest elections, right, in the US. We have not quite reached, I think, the stage where Mukesh Ambani can be even a president of India or a chief minister of a state. Maybe that will take some more time. Maybe another 10 years. As the Hindutva project rolls over more. If a monk can become a politician, the chief minister, why not an industrialist? The industrialists can say, look, I have created 1 lakh jobs, 10,000 jobs. What has this politician done? Right. So I believe in Gujarat it is possible, and in at an all India level, whether but definitely yes. I don't think any prime minister has unabashedly identified himself with industrialists. Any government with particular industrialists. As much as the present regime kind of a thing. So that also, I think, is probably a new thing. Whereas somebody in the old days, Neta would never be seen. Whatever meetings would happen would be, off the record. It would be in some shady, some hotel or something. Whereas today, I think, it is more unabashed kind of a display. So a prime minister going in a private businessman's helicopter or aircraft is totally kosher now. But and probably there is no, that kind of a morality kind of a thing. So we are probably moving more and more towards the American model. And same thing, there again, elections. So somebody like, say, DeSantis, his ability to fight elections is based on how much money he's able to raise, right? So if somebody, say, endorses, so endorsement matters a lot, right? So I think probably we are moving into a situation where both in industry and politics, the entry barriers are increasing. Okay. Now you look at, for example, say industries. Like we know that in most industries have now been captured by the incumbent, by the entrenched guys. And plus, when projects, they turn, increasingly capital intensive. It'll be very difficult for a new entrant, an upstart, to first of all, put in the kind of matching, promoters' equity, and in the earlier cases which we have studied, whether the Nadars, the Gounders, etc., typically, it was kind of a thing like, I sell my land, I pawn my family gold, my wife's gold, I borrow from my relatives, I leverage my community network. That was the typical route where how industries came together, right? And along with it, you had a mix of regional parties and etc. But when your political funding becomes centralized, when industries become more centralized, when you have more industrial concentration, whatever economic concentration, as Professor Bardhan says, then I think we are moving more and more towards an American kind of capitalism, American kind of democracy, where you will find probably, both contesting elections as well as entering industry. I think both becomes, very difficult, But probably the Americans have found a way of, still, resolving it, through whatever unemployment benefits, through various kinds of whatever buffers, right? To take care of the unemployed people with low incomes, etc. But India, we are very far from that kind of a thing, So we don't have any social safety nets, right? Unemployment insurance and those kind of things, So how long this is sustainable? And plus, I think the demographics, if you're going to have a youth bulge, and you go anywhere, you go in a metro, you go in a train, you see more and more young people, young girls and boys, right? It's because it is very worrying. And when you think of it, whether these people will be able to find jobs and all these things. So ultimately, I think social mobility matters a lot. Whether those mobility routes are getting blocked, and whether the entry barriers are increasing, both politically as well as economically. I think these are things to ponder over. So it's not as though tomorrow, say some other party comes to power, whether they'll be able to roll back, because once something takes over, it's very difficult to roll back. It requires a certain momentum, and we have seen a lot of things happen in the last 10 years which we never imagined. This could never have happened in the past. So maybe it is possible, like I said, that possible that these 10 years are an aberration. It's possible that the first 70 years were an aberration. That's also possible. So that we were basically some kind of a Hindu majoritarian kind of a thing, a kind of a thing. And these first 70 years, where somehow it came as an accident, and now is the real thing. I don't know. I don't have any answers.
Thank you. I think we are out of time, but I'm going to, before I conclude, I'm going to request Professor Bardhan, one, you had something to comment on Mr. Damodaran, what he had said, that, and I have one more question for you as a last one, which I think most people here are very worried about. Do you see that this will break, or do you see it kind of unraveling? Will there be some way in which one can be hopeful that things might change? So I want you to give us last comment on that, and of course what you wanted to respond to Mr. Damodaran, and then we can conclude. I'm sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, what I would respond to Mr. Damodaran was essentially to supplement things that he has talked about. But it started with his saying about his, I haven't seen the interview with Arvind Panagaria. I at all do not agree with him when he says, oh, in the beginning of development, inequality always goes up. That used to be the old Kuznets thesis. Since then, there's been a lot of research, part of including my own research. Inequality is bad even for efficiency. In fact, one very simple example is that reducing inequality will help even the MSMEs to get more credit. Land reforms help small farmers. So these are examples in which reducing inequality helps people in growth. So inequality itself hurts growth. So that old consensus in the beginning, you have to have inequality, that is gone. I think Arvind is outdated on that. There's been, now I can cite about 30, 40 articles which have proved conclusively that inequality is, you don't need it for growth. In fact, inequality hurts growth. The other thing I wanted to say, even growth, with all the time in newspapers you see, oh, this quarter, that is the growth rate, etc. I actually don't even look at them for the simple reason, I know how these growth rates are computed. And this is, but growth rates of GDP growth is problematic in all countries, but it's particularly problematic in India, because India is in a country in which 80% of the people are in the informal sector. Nobody has a clue in the last quarter or in the last year how much the informal sector has grown. Nobody has a clue, including MOSPI, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. They don't have a clue what the informal sectors do. So you know how GDP growth is calculated for this large informal sector, which apart from people, that's almost half the economy. 45% of the economy is in the informal sector. So what do you do? Since you don't have data for the informal sector, so you project from the formal sector growth. So to me, when half of the economy, you don't have data, except one source of data you have some sales sales tax data, or now GST data, from which we infer how the informal sector may have grown. Except for that, you have no clue. So you project from the formal sector growth to informal sector. Now, in other countries, informal sector is small. In India, informal sector is huge. So I don't pay any attention to GDP growth data because I know how they are computed. So that is something we have to keep in mind whenever you talk about growth. What growth are you talking about? Do you know how the informal sector is growing? You have no clue. And that's one of the reasons why our growth rates show something, and we say we are going to be the highest growth rate among major countries. You hear political leaders saying something. This is just complete nonsense because you don't know how much of your economy has grown, and that's where the MSME sector has grown. Another issue that Mr. Damodaran very rightly pointed out in the electoral bond thing is talk about the irony is this is they get tax exemption, tax deduction for donating electoral bond. So not merely, I have actually written on it in one of my books, I forget where, I said, not merely the electoral bond is a con game of getting the ruling party the major part of corporate money, other taxpayers are subsidizing it. When you get a tax exemption for it, taxpayers are subsidizing contribution to the ruling party. Even if you are not buying electoral bond, you are contributing to the ruling party money because it's tax deductible. Last question that I wanted to mention to Mr. Damodaran, mention about the revenue. There's a lot of revenue coming up. I was at that point thinking, but it's not showing up in the tax GDP ratio. If you look at the tax GDP ratio data, it's stagnant. I don't think tax GDP ratio in India has gone up. Why the last 10 years, last 20 years, it has not gone up. So if the government is collecting that much of revenue from the conglomerates, it doesn't show up in the, at least in the tax GDP ratio data, which makes me think that maybe because we are not taxing the rich, which is something that I mentioned before, if anything, there's been in September 2019, there's been a huge reduction in corporate tax, a very sharp reduction in corporate tax. So at least the money that, I'm not talking about the money that the political parties are collecting. I'm talking about revenue to the government. I have not yet seen, there is some buoyancy, people say in the GST collection now, but total tax GDP ratio is still remains stagnant and is one of the lowest. Even among developing countries is one of the lowest. India's tax GDP ratio is one of the lowest. And that is not just the central government taxes. We have local property taxation is very little. One of the lowest local property tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest. India is one of the lowest. But anyway, that's all about tax. The last question that you asked, I don't know how to answer. As I said, we economists can get blue in the face to giving suggestions about this thing should be done, that thing should be done. That's very easy to do. To me now, the whole thing is how is the politics going to be shaped over the next 10 years? And there, our democracy, I mean, the new building is coming up, but democracy is not in buildings. Democracy is in certain norms, certain conventions, certain institutions, and all those are being decimated. I'm afraid that is what is happening. In that situation, the only hope, since democratic normal channels are being either decimated or clogged, that's why from time to time, you see people coming out in the streets. Think of the farmers' movement. People came out in the street, blocked the roads for 1 year. Okay. I don't support some of their demands, the farmers' movement demands, but I am really enthused by such movements because I see them as when you clog the normal channels of democracy, the only thing left is coming out in the street and protest. Same thing happened with CAA, anti-CAA, and the anti-NCR movement. People were in Shaheen Bagh, etc. So it seems to me the real hope, if any, I'm hoping against hope, is social movements, because political normal channels are being clogged and our constitution is being trampled, and the guardian of the constitution, the Supreme Court, is erratic. I'm not saying completely wrong, erratic, and often rather timid. So our constitution, I would say, for example, to me, anybody who says they want a Hindu Rashtra, I tell them right or wrong, they're unconstitutional. Hindu Rashtra is unconstitutional. That's the basic thing in my judgment. So you cannot, if we are going towards Hindu Rashtra, then we are trampling upon our constitution. And if our constitution cannot protect us, going out in the streets is the only way. And that's why I'm saying I'm hopeful there will be over time social movements, and at least South India is showing. I'm not that hopeful about North India or Western India, but South India at least has shown that it is possible to overcome the influence, massive influence of money and rhetoric of nationalism and rhetoric of religious bigotry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are really out of time, but it's been such an interesting topic that generated a lot of interest. And I apologize to those listeners whose questions I didn't take up because I think they were similar, and we got answers from Professor Bardhan. And
one thing I want to clarify. I want to assure Professor Bardhan that I have not endorsed Arvind Panigrahiya.
Okay.
So, I'd like to once again thank Professor Bardhan for sparing his time at a different time zone and joining us tonight, and Mr. Damodaran for giving us so much information to digest. It was a very, very interesting talk. And I think before the webinar began, Professor Bardhan said something about concentration, which is monopoly over truth. Nobody has a monopoly over truth. And I think this Anekdhara attempt is to break, anyone trying to take over all streams of information, as you said, are being controlled. And so even if it's a small attempt, it's an important attempt. And there are many such attempts to break this monopoly over truth or untruth, and to get more and more, aspects of the truth out to whatever small audiences that you can reach out to. So I think it's in that same process, and really thank everyone, and thank Anekdhara team for the very well organized webinar today. Mr. Ravi Babu, over to you to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Badri. You've done my job. So thanks to all the panelists, Professor Bardhan, both for suggesting the topic and also are agreeing readily, and also speaking in a time zone which is much different from, it's all true. It should be almost 11 o'clock somewhere there, I think.
It's 12 midnight.
12 midnight. Yeah. Okay. And thanks to Harish Damodaran, he has also agreed readily, and his talk itself it shows a lot of amount of empirical work that he has done on the topic. And to Badri Narayan, my friend, is ever ready, and thanks for excellent moderation. And now my thanks to Shreya, our poster designer, which is an excellent poster that she designs, and Sadiq for his technical support. And thanks to all the viewers from the YouTube. Your support is vital for us, because the webinars are being organized as a public discourse to understand various nuances of any topic for that matter. So thanks to one and all. And before I conclude, we would like to inform you that June 25th will be our next webinar, again on a Sunday. That's how we fix our schedules. Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot again. Thank you.